the hour. So just like to welcome everyone formally to today's webinar. And today we're looking at the secrets of workforce management. Got a lot of people registered for this webinar, a lot of people dialed in already. So I think we're going to get a very good attendance for this one. So delighted to welcome our panel. Delighted initially to welcome James Barnes from Destructive Digital. James has been a big friend of Call Center Helper over the years and has certainly helped point out to me a few of the errors I've made in my planning decisions, which have now been reflected in some of the articles we write, particularly one on the maximum occupancy. It's been very useful. So James, welcome. You're going to be sharing some of your secrets on how to get the structural pieces right behind workforce management.
Yep, fantastic.
Wonderful. Welcome, James. We're also delighted to be joined by Faye Herring, who's had a career as a planner and is going to be sharing some of the lessons, Faye, which I guess you've learnt the hard way. You're from SSE Energy Services and have worked in a range of roles as well.
Yes, mine's going to be mainly about the lessons I've learned from being at the coalface in real time.
Wonderful. And also delighted to be joined on her first webinar with us, Kristen Emenecker from Playvox. And Kristen, you're also going to be sharing a sort of range of different secrets that you've observed over the years.
Yeah, that's right. And secrets over the years and sort of the more recent topics that we've been discussing. So yeah, excited.
Yeah, and it's certainly a fascinating time. The past 12 months have been, I think, not something that people would have expected, and planning has been quite a challenge during all of that. So,
Jonty, did you want to go into the non-countdown slides?
Oh yes, indeed, we should be onto the other slides here. So just a little bit of housekeeping. If you want to watch a replay of today, I know a lot of you are probably going to be wanting to share this with your management team or with your planning team. And you can do that in about 2 hours time at callcenterhelper.com/recorded webinars. We could be a bit quicker than that. So soon after the webinar's ended. If you'd like to, now's the time to log into our chat room. This is not the Zoom chat, this is a separate function. And just put in your first name, your last name. The quickest way to find that is to go to cch.chat. You can do that in a separate browser or through your mobile phone. Just type it into the name of your browser there, and that should get it. cch.chat is the quickest way in. It is in a separate window, so if you have the webinar on one side, the chat on the other is probably the easiest way to do it if your screen is big enough, if not through your mobile phone. There is an added advantage of being in the chat room, as well as being able to speak, ask questions and the like. You can also download the webinar slides here, which is just in this little line on the right hand side. We'll be running a quiz as well, and here are the quiz voting buttons. So when you're in the chat room, and we've got about only about a third of the audience. We've only got 72 of the 180 so far online in the chat room. So so here's the link. Just type in cch.chat, and you can add a question into the chat room, and or a tip, and we have a bottle of champagne, box of chocolates, or an Amazon gift card if you prefer, for the best tip. If you just like to use #question if you have a question, or #tip if you have a tip, and we'd be delighted to deal with that. So I'm going to start off with a poll, and just want to set the scene in. What is it you use to forecast your contact volumes? So is it pen and paper? Is it spreadsheets? Is it workforce management software? Or do you have some specialist forecasting software? Or do you have a combination? If you have a combination, select all of the things that you use to forecast contact volumes. I'd probably pen and paper, and bendy ruler is one of the ones that I've often used in the in the past if you're trying to extrapolate a curve. So what does it use to forecast contact volumes? I think we've got most of the people have put in. If you've got any other answers, if you'd like to put that into our chat room, which is at cch.chat. Let's just share the results up on the screen here. And we see not many people using pen and paper anymore, but James, the vast majority of people here using spreadsheets, albeit possibly spreadsheets and workforce management software or specialist software as well. Any surprises for you on that?
Yeah, and I kind of reckon if you had another question saying, do you use all 4 of them, everyone would say yes. So I think there's a lot of frustration, especially things like chat coming on board, that actually a lot of the software can't cope with everything. And when I go and see clients, they're quite frustrated because they do a lot in the actual software. Then they go off and still using Excel or different types of software to try and do the what ifs and make life a bit easier. So it's a tough question to put down to 4 answers.
It is, but what's perhaps surprising here is only less than half the audience are using any sort of software in terms of WFM or forecasting that is specially geared up for that. So, okay, well, we'll come back to that in a minute. Just a reminder, if you're not logged into our chat room, just type in callcenterhelper.com.chat or cch.chat into the browser would be the best way to do that. So probably the best point now to jump across to James Barnes. And James, if you'd like to share with us your secrets of WFM. Wonderful.
Oh, great. Yeah, so just a quick intro. So I've kind of had 3 lives into WFM. I think the first one was doing the job. So I've kind of done everything from the TV shopping, airlines, car breakdown to finance. Kind of been around all the houses. And then I kind of moved into the tech side of it. So I've done a lot of work with NICE on the geeky side. So I've probably, as John T said, been annoying him over the years with some of the calculations. I found that fun. And probably the last 5 to 6 years is using the experience of doing the job and also the tech to do a lot of consulting. So I'm quite lucky to do a lot of the transformation projects. So when you asked the question, I could actually recall my mind, probably thousands of contact centers I've seen, what's good. And I thought, okay, well, what is the common thread that every great team does? And I reckon there's 5 things really good WFM teams do. So I've kind of helped to bring that out. And I think the first 4 on, I'll give the 5th one at the end to try and hold some suspense. I think at WFM, the secret is a design, agreements, roles, and governance. And I think this is applicable if you're like a BPO, and I've seen some of them have got literally over 100,000 agents, to call centers have only got 25 agents, or maybe call centers spend millions of pounds on the latest tech, or some have just got, as you said in your little questionnaire, pen and paper, Excel. And I think these are the 4 core things they all do. And if you do them right, you can have a really kind of successful WFM. I think the first thing is design. You know, I think the real secret is, even though we kind of live in the moment, in reality, of the calls coming in this interval, really good WFM every single week throughout history into the future and the past is planned out in a design. And I've just put here a very simple design. Now, I know BPO is probably watching today. They have much more complicated environments. They've got clients with demands, and some environments like the telephone or TV, things can change very quickly. But a good design means every single week, from miles in the future to current to past, is in some kind of process. Now, it might be a long term in the future. It might just be with a CFO or maybe some kind of department doing some what ifs, but those numbers do exist. And then as that comes nearer and nearer in reality, people in the business are changing numbers in a Cognos or an Excel sheet into real practical things, maybe putting shrinkage holidays in. And as it gets nearer and nearer and nearer, it's potentially going through more people's hands. So a forecaster might get it over to a scheduler. And one of the questions you asked about scheduling is, how do we cope with peaks and troughs? So potentially, before they generate the schedules, they're putting in shrinkage in there to make sure the flex can cope. And when they run great schedules and the schedules match the requirements, they're handing it over to the scheduler, or maybe on a smaller contact center, it gets handed over to the management team. And then potentially, even when it goes into the past, it's still not forgotten, and that information exists in terms of reforecasting. So I think the first secret is a happy life in a contact center. There must be a design, even if a simple one is this, or a kind of complex one. I think the next big secret is, in that design to succeed, all the stakeholders in the business have to have their agreements on activities. You know, even now we go to contact centers, and usually when there's stress is because people are booking training without notice, or there's meetings, or quite often a CEO wants to turn up and wants to do a town hall, bring everyone off the phone and do a great speech, and you're the planner goes, actually, no, you can't do that, CEO, sorry. So you really do need clear agreements with every single stakeholder in the business. Now, this is just a simple one. Literally, it's just a notice period for everything that happens, and it could be a short period, long period. However, really good businesses go into much more detail, and they would probably have like a service agreement with everything that happens. So I would make sure everything that possibly happens that you have to schedule or cope with, there's an agreement behind it. And I would even go even further and say anything that you don't plan has to have an agreement. So for example, you might do return back to work interviews after being ill. You should still have a process. How does a team leader bring them off? But once you get them in the system or agree with stakeholders and link back into the design, you're in a really much more kind of healthy environment where things can go to plan, and you can also cope with more kind of variances. So you've got a really good design, we've got really good agreements, and now we kind of get onto the people side of it. I think the best way I've seen of helping design people's roles is a RACI. So kind of really quickly go through a responsible is someone who does the work. So it could be a forecaster, or it could be a real-time person, it could be a scheduler. Accountable is the person making the final decision. So it might be a head of, it might be a director, and that person has to make sure they also, to make that decision, clearly understand the principles of WFM and planning. And then consulted is, I've got to speak to someone, discuss it. So it could be an agent discussing part-time schedule rules, and informed means I'm telling that person. So it could literally just be actually telling someone when their break is. Now, for us as planners, unfortunately, like this very confusing screen, is races are not straightforward. So a RACI usually is a list of activities or decisions on the left-hand side, and then for each role, we will then plot who's accountable, who does the work, who's informed. So it's usually quite straightforward. However, as planners, we have to take into a whole new dimension, and that dimension is time. So we have to understand is who's really making that decision. And reality is, if I go miles into the future, so if I forget this year, 2021, and I go back in 2025, probably potentially my CFO is deciding on the activities. And really good kind of businesses, the CEO or CFO or director is actually agreeing the plan in this much detail. They truly understand what the shrinkage is, what the occupancy is the max occupancy, if you, for example, and then they understand it, and then they hand it over to different people in the business. And a bit like your design, as that week gets nearer and nearer in time, different people in the business take accountability and can change the plan. So the good news is you've got a very happy CFO, he understands the budget, he understands the drivers, but also he can rest at night, he can hand it over to people, and is not going to get kind of bothered and kind of emails saying, can James move shifts, or can James have higher holiday? Because he's empowered other people in the business to make those kind of decisions. So we kind of have a really strong design, kind of really, all the activities are defined with service agreements, so really robust. All the people know their jobs, fantastic. They're all empowered from the CFO right down to the real-time guy. However, unfortunately in life, and probably the last 2 years has really kind of pushed that forward, is things go wrong, things happen. And in fact, I think if there's anyone on the kind of chat here works in retail, I bet you put your hand in the air and go, yeah, I know, everything always goes wrong in retail. I think what my personal great kind of change was moving from different environments to different industries. And I think I was quite really taken back when I moved from finance to a retail company where every year that we went 4 times the size in Christmas, or we have jobs in outsourcing where, you know, a client says, I want to go live in 3 weeks. So it's always great having a plan that was designed 5 years ago or 2 years ago. However, you need to cope with changes. And I think the big secret is governance. So governance allows you to adapt. And even if you're BPO and you've got massive operating procedures, they're doing two core things. They have reporting, and the reporting usually comes in two kind of outputs. It's a hours balance sheet, like a capacity plan, but rather than the P&L of cash, you have hours. You can see your kind of delta. And the second thing they produce is an interval requirement. So they would clearly know, are we under and over staff? And that's really good for analysing your published schedules. And then they have a very quick process, because what we can't be doing is every week discuss every single week, because by the time we get to the end, by the time we get to Friday, we've only discussed 1 week. So we have a kind of very light, fast agenda process where we can really kind of analyse and cope with kind of processes. And an example on the left-hand side is, for example, we might have the first agenda is what happened last week. And that's a great way of analysing what has the delivery guys done or the operation manager done. For example, the call volume might drop. So they've gone off and they've maybe increased holiday, done more coaching. Then that opens the opportunity, can we remove more hours in the future from induction courses or potentially from the also more training to save some costs? So we're really reforecasting like a heartbeat every single week to drive the business forward and really improve on the original plan. And then we have like a formal handover from the forecaster to the scheduler and the scheduler to real time. So that really kind of really good robust pushback. Or that's a great schedule. Or maybe even better because you've not taken into account the sickness profiles on the Monday or potentially Friday and Saturday. And it also gives the opportunity to discuss the induction courses. So because what we can't do is go on Monday and say, I want to hire 1,000 people. And it allows the induction courses to go through gateways and release more kind of agents to build those courses. And then one good test, I think, of any call center is, how did we get to this point? And if you record all the decisions in these meetings, it means on the week we're in now, you can map that history right back from the start. And I think the big lesson from here is, my big secret is, although there's 4 things here, there's actually one big secret, and is you must do all 4. And if you miss anything out, unfortunately, it might mean you don't get that kind of really happy, successful WFM team.
Wonderful. Thanks very much for that, James. We're going to do a quick poll here, and because we looked at notice periods was one of the things James talked, and asked the question: how far out do you publish your schedules? Is it 1 week, 2 to 3 weeks, 4 to 5 weeks, 6 to 7 weeks, or is it more than 7 weeks? So just how far out do you publish your schedules? While I'm waiting for those to come in, James did like the racy analogy there: responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And thought it was very interesting putting in place that interval requirement of forecasted versus scheduled, so that everyone is on the same board and has visibility of that. I think that's great. So let's have a look at the scheduling period, and here's the results. And Faye, it looks like 4 to 5 weeks is the most common schedule that gets published there. Though there is quite a considerable number that publish more than 7 weeks. What has your experience of that been?
4 to 5 weeks. We've had times, where you try and get ahead if you've got a big something coming up that's going to take resource away, but 4 to 5 weeks is quite normal. And
indeed, I think as James showed, there's not necessarily one answer. There's a sort of the advanced schedule, the main schedule, and the last minute schedule in that as well. So we're just going to jump this. If I can just share my screen now, we're going to jump across to a quiz. So if you're not already logged into our chat room, I think we've only got about half of the audience logged into the chat room. So here's the address. Just type in cch.chat into your browser, and we'll start off with the quiz today. And so let's see, 111 logged in so far. So true or false? 43% of contacts are actively recruiting. So if it's true, press the blue button A at the bottom of your screen. If you think it's false, press the red button, false B button at the bottom of your screen on the chat room. So just wait for the answers to come in there. And let's see what the answer is there. Well, actually, most of you got that wrong. The answer was false. Actually, amazing enough, 86% of contact centers are actively recruiting currently. So I think a big sign there's some pent-up demand in the economy. So next question, what is the industry standard service level for responding to email? Is it 80% of emails answered in 4 hours? Is it 80% of answers in 24 hours? That's B. Is it C, 100% of emails answered in 4 hours? Or is it D, 100% of emails answered in 24 hours? Now, I know there's a lot of planners in the room who will be tutting at how you can have a target of 100%, but that's the question we asked. And let's see what the answer is. Actually, it looks like most people got that answer wrong again. A lot of people got the 24 hours right, but actually the answer is, the most common answer is 100% of emails answered in 24 hours. We did a big survey, what a contact center is doing right now, tail end of last year, and the most common answer, statistically you can't get to 100%, but the target is there, 100% answered within 24 hours. Okay, last question. And what is the world record for the longest time a customer has ever been kept on hold? Now, I don't know who keeps these records. Is it 5 hours, 40 minutes? Is it 10 hours, 40 minutes? Is it 15 hours and 40 minutes? Or is it 20 hours and 40 minutes? Let's have a look at who's voted. We've just got a few more votes coming in. If you don't know the answer, just take a guess on this one. I think it's just an educated guess there. Got 89 people voted so far, and actually most people got this one right, so maybe everyone knows their world records for wait times. This was an instance that happened in 2012 where Andrew Kahn called Qantas Airways to confirm his flight from Adelaide to New York City. He was reportedly kept on hold for over 15 hours because of a coding error, presumably in the IVR, and that error kept him in the hold loop for all of that time. So I guess that is certainly a long wait. He must have been very desperate to get back home on that one. So who's the winner? The winner is Nadia, the score of 53. So we'll have a prize going out to you, Nadia. So let's have a look. We're just going to take a couple of quick tips from the chat room. Nick has sent in a tip in the chat room. Make a note of any event or unforeseen activity that impacted your scheduling, etc., and what you did about it as you go through your current year, so that when you come to plan going forward, you can refer back to what happened at the same time last year and consider whether that event might reoccur. Certainly that's quite an interesting one. And I guess this year might be quite an interesting one because you can't necessarily bake what happened this year into your other schedules. And Joel's got quite an interesting one. Schedule people by 15-minute intervals, not 30 or 60-minute intervals, now that agents are all at home. Certainly with home working, it gets a lot easier to stagger shifts. More breaks help reduce burnout, and micro-scheduling unlocks happier agents and builds breaks into the workday. It's also very good if you've got 15-minute staggered shifts of matching demand with call profiles. So some great tips there. We're going to jump back to the agenda now. And Faye, if you could share with us your presentation.
I will, thank you. James, I was honestly like a nodding dog throughout your presentation. I think everything you said is how, in an ideal world, I would want things to run in the call centre. Not quite there yet, but I found myself, yep, to everything you were saying. So,
wonderful.
Quick introduction, guys. So I'm Faye. I'm the real-time performance manager for the SSE part of the OVO group. I've been here for 4 years, and prior to that I worked for a global outsource partner, which I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And my career has really been in real-time management and telephony infrastructure and various different bits of technology. Worked in planning for 12 years. Currently planned for around 3,500 FTE. Was a bronze award winner at last year's UK CCMA. So I'm quite active on LinkedIn and so forth, so connect with me on there if you're not already. But I'll take you through a couple of my tips, and they're probably a bit more I don't know what I'm looking for, but a little bit less technical than James. James sounds like he's the perfect planner. I'm more the one that tries to fix things when things don't go to plan. So, so my first tip, or my first secret, is if you ever get the opportunity to do so, work in a planning team in or with an outsourced partner, a BPO. I definitely found starting my career working in an outsourced partner really helped me to understand the different requirements that various different clients have across the board. You know, it's never one size fits all, and I really found that helped me not have tunnel vision when it comes to planning. So that's me on the right hand side with our planning team, one of our outsourced partners in the Philippines, in January last year, just before COVID took hold. So that was the last business trip that I was able to go on. But for me, you know, you experience some various demands from various different lines of business, very different personalities, very different inputs coming in from around the organisation. And if ever there was a time where you need to funnel all of those requests in, you know, that James was talking about, to make sure that you are sticking to your governance, working with an outsourced partner will certainly get you there. So I honestly think that, you know, I'm working for a privately owned company now. We have our own objectives, our own service level goals, and we don't have clients. But I honestly think that part of my career gave me such good growth in terms of understanding the different parts of planning. So my secret number one. Secondly, for me, slow and steady wins the race. So you know, James talked about how things should work in terms of scheduled lockdown periods, agreements, and I'm absolutely on board with that. But as we know, that quite often change is forced upon us. I laughed out loud, James, when you said about the CEO coming and saying they want to do a town hall, because you must honestly be a fly on the wall in my contact centre, because that is exactly what happens a lot of the time. But my tip for change management is, so slow and steady wins the race. We get a lot of change forced upon us, especially as a real-time function. That could be that we're going to send out a 2 million mailing. It could be that we want to move a line of business into one of our outsourced partners and away from another outsourced partner, whatever that might be. And I've been in the game for 12 years, and I've honestly seen this done so well and so badly. My top tip would be to, wherever possible, try and foresee the change. You know, a lot of the things that land on my lap today that need to be done for tomorrow should have come up 6 weeks ago, but they haven't, because we haven't looked far enough out. So wherever possible, identifying the situation as soon as you can, and then engaging with your key stakeholders as soon as you can. For me, one of the things that happens quite often is we dismiss risks, and we dismiss people's concerns with a view to get something up and running really, really quickly. And then quite often those concerns that we've dismissed become a huge red flag or a showstopper when it comes to go live. So consider everyone's input, consider everyone's thought process when you're going through a change curve. consider your speed to proficiency. This is a huge one, which I've seen done really well and really badly in the 12 years that I've been in planning. If you're making a change for cost savings, never assume that you're going to get those cost savings immediately. Often you're going to need to run both approaches in tandem to make sure that the advisors are proficient, to make sure that your systems are running as expected, to make sure that your MI that is being produced is accurate, and then you can take your foot off of the bay before you get on the boat. So I think for me that's so important, that you're not going in both feet first, and that you're running whatever that might be, both of them in tandem first of all. And then my last tip, I'm nearly out of time, and I'm a real timer by trade. I'm a real timer at heart. I tend to make quite emotional, quick decisions, but I've definitely learned over the years to respond to what is happening, other than reacting or overreacting. So it's really, really tempting as a real-time function to rip out all of your offline time, throw your back office on the phone, stick IVR messages on, whatever it might be, where you think you can quickly deflect traffic or get calls answered. But what you're probably going to do is cause yourself a lot of rework down the line. So if you're asking customers to go online, can they actually do what they're calling for online? If you're putting your back office team on the phone, is that going to cause more redials later in the week because they haven't done the work that the customer's calling about? So, stop and think, engage with the operation, understand what your call drivers are. Is it likely to reoccur? Is it a blip? Is it weather related? Is it Martin Lewis on the TV related? Whatever that might be. And if you've asked yourself all of those questions and you're comfortable, take your action, pre-plan your offline time for the rest of the week. If you can't comfortably answer those questions, then sit it out. Generally, a small queue bust here and there will solve the problem, and you're not going to end up with 20 hours of coaching sessions to replan or whatever that might be. So yeah, respond accordingly and don't overreact is my third and final tip.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for that indeed. Some great tips there, and just like to ask the audience what you like best about the presentations so far. Certainly in the presentation by Faye, I did like the slow and steady wins the race. I'm also in the bashing department. Don't react, respond. I think there's a big danger of reacting there, and very, very good. Understand the key drivers. So let's jump across to the chat room and see what questions and comments have come in from the audience. Gianna says, it's nice to see the process in a black and white. As a seasoned WFM, we know what to do, but rarely present the WFM structure process in such an organized way. So James, I think that was tying into your framework there, as well as Faye's comments there. Great. So let's have a look. A question from Joel, who says, how can scheduling cope with the growth of the gig economy where staffing is sometimes unknown? James, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on gig economy?
Absolutely, yeah. And just remember, we're trying to end up on the live date or the live time with the perfect schedule. So it doesn't mean every single person you employ is going to be on 9 to 5. So, and there's a lot of successful businesses now actually have a much bigger mix of staff, but they do reward the benefits appropriately. So, if someone is on an 8 to 4 and loves the early shift, fantastic. And that's great for the business. In terms of flexibility, they aren't offering the company that benefits. So if someone is offering you more flexibility, they've been rewarded, but then that also fits into your design as well. So maybe if you're paying some more money, you only deploy them when you definitely need them. So it's growing. There are more people now want flexible businesses, and I know a lot of the outsourcers have people not on zero-hour contracts, but potentially part-timers in a modern way, where they're getting maybe 20 hours and they flex up and down. But I think the most important thing is getting that kind of mixed right, but also rewarding the staff for their flexibility in pay and benefits, so they're happy and they stay with you.
And I guess there's also an upside on things like the gig economy, in that if you've got variable demand, some people might be happy to take, an hour and a half work a day during just the peak. And so it could be quite a good way of doing peak demand, or if things are going high, having flexibility built in can be a benefit. So Faye, I don't know if you've seen here, have you seen any great examples of how scheduling teams have changed the way a business works? Perhaps by changing billing cycles to smooth out peaks, which can be quite easy-ish, but wondered how empowered teams have changed businesses. Faye, any guidance?
Yeah, so I think actually that one is a really good example. So I work in the utility industry. Our bills and letters that go out are what drives our calls in quite often. Myself and the forecasting lead, so we've worked with our dispatch house to ensure that we have a daily cap on the amount of bills and letters that go out. And there will be times of the month where we'll allow them to go over the cap if we are if we're seeing our volume come in under forecast, and equally there'll be times where we ask them to reduce the cap further and to make sure that we're not putting customers at a detriment. I also had to Google what gig economy was. I've never come across that before.
Gig economy, yeah, is if you're in the audience and not familiar with the gig economy, that is using models like Uber, where people are employed almost just by the hour and work when they want to work, don't work when they don't want to work.
Yeah.
Sort of a flexible model there. Kristen, we've got a question that's been set in. I don't know if you've got an answer for this one, but I guess this is sent in by one of the 60% of people in the audience who haven't got a WFM system. What was the percentage increase in staff efficiency once workforce management software was in place? And in fact, if anyone in the audience has got a figure on this, it'd be quite interesting. Currently, we overstaff to make sure contact peak times are dealt with effectively, but a WFM tool that plans the day out more accurately would save us at least 1 out of the 30 FTE daily. So I'd be interested to know if anyone's measured the success. Kristen, have you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly it depends to some degree on the staffing model and how lean we're getting, right? I think James made the point earlier about, now that we've got people working from home, if you've got some, sort of part-timers or gig work or, things that you can really get very granular in terms of matching staffing to the expected volume in real time, then you can really, dial that in. But we've certainly seen, I would say I've seen as much as 20%. I've seen probably more regularly, in the 5 to 10%, but it's typically substantial.
James, you were sort of nodding away there. What have you seen?
Yeah, and I think there's a few type of kind of costs. So I think, as Kirsten said, there's an improvement on the staffing. So it gives the ability to blend better. But I think blending is not just about staffing; it's about the customer. So, you saw earlier about the service level for emails, 24 hours. But the important thing is, what do customers do? If I get to customers within 1 hour, does it mean not just we reduce the contacts on multiple channels, but does it change their spend? So I think the WFM is not just about, us planners or us agents. It's about the customer. And I think really good what the forecaster brings is all that analytical data to understand, actually, when we have all this great information in software, what can we change? And I think the big difference I'm seeing is when customers, really their clients, look across the whole platform and think about the customer and understand what the customer is. They don't have things like 24-hour service levels. They have a 1 hour or 2 hours, but really know what they need to. And now that makes it even challenger, because you might think, okay, when an email comes in, if I don't fix that problem within an hour, they're going to go on web chat or they're going to go somewhere else, which means scheduling even harder. But it kind of brings out why the software and this kind of roles are very important.
Wonderful. Well, probably a good time now to jump across to Kristen. And Kristen, if you could put your slides up and share with us your secrets of WFM.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll introduce myself a little bit first for those in the audience who may not be familiar with me, since as we said, this is the first time I've gotten to come into this forum. So Chris Nemenecker. I have been in the contact center operations and planning space for 20, I love to say 20, but it's actually closer to 25, don't tell anyone, years. A very long time. Started out in outsourcers, so I completely agree with Faye's point about the experience that one gets in a condensed, period of time from so many different perspectives and clients and so many different programs. And then I went from there into consulting, which also gives one, sort of access to all these different contact centers, all of these different models, different industries. So that was fantastic experience. And then I went into the technology side to kind of work on, okay, as a consultant and as a practitioner, these are the things I really wanted to see. How can we get those into, into some of the tools? And then, spent a long career at a number of companies like In Contact and most recently ran global product strategy for Verint. And then now I'm at Playvox, which is kind of fun because it's a modern take, much more omni-channel cloud, right? Just a completely modern take on workforce management and workforce optimization, quality, all of those things. So so it's been a lot of fun. And I have to say, as Faye I think said, I have been just sitting and nodding along like a nodding dog to both of these presentations so far, because they are just so right on. And yeah, it's you guys have really covered all the good stuff. As a matter of fact, James made a really good point right before we sort of switched to my piece here about not just scheduling for the agents, but scheduling for the customer and how the customer communicates with us. And I think, if I think about recent conversations and the secrets of WFM as it's shifted in 2020, so much of it has to do with managing channel shift. And managing how customers want to come in and communicate with us, or how they can, and maybe in some cases how our companies want them to come in and work with us. But I found some really interesting, secrets and tips around this area. So one is, obviously, visibility is key. We can't, properly forecast what we can't sort of aggregate and understand. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. But another one is that it's not typically, when we think of shift from voice to, let's say, chat, right? That tends to be sort of a newer one, maybe some other types of messaging platforms. It doesn't tend to be a one-for-one replacement in most of the centers that I've worked with. In other words, a lot of times when we forecast the volume, we want to think that for every call that we don't get, we're going to get a chat. And in many cases, what I'm seeing is that's not the way it works. There typically are more non-voice interactions versus voice interactions. Now, the handle time on those may be longer, and to the point that James made, the synchronicity may be different. In other words, the service level may be longer. It may not be a live interaction. I may have like an email or an asynchronous messaging. I may have more time to be able to get back to them, which means I can stagger it. I don't get hit with all of that peak when it's all happening at once. But it is important to understand, for your business, for your organization, what does that volume shift look like? And should the assumption be one-for-one, or are you seeing that it's a slightly different ratio? Obviously, working with our partners we've talked about here, I think that's one of the main tips or secrets that you should take away from this is, partnering with those internal partners and collaborating with them across different roles. So important, probably more important in the last 12 months than what we've ever seen, because we're all sort of in this little silo at home, or many of us are, and trying to get things done and working really tightly with peers is the best way to do that. So part of that is, just like with everything else in the contact center, everything else that impacts our volume, understand what they're doing, right? If there's a push, to move volumes, if there's a promotion to use chat, if there's a new chatbot, if there's something else that's changing, volumes, certainly we need to know about that. We need to know about it early. So as every good planner knows, ask, because they don't always tell us proactively. Obviously, we talked about understanding different service levels, synchronous or asynchronous work, right? Does it have to be done right now as it's coming in live, or do we have a little bit of time? And then I think one of the most important things to look at is concurrency, right? So some of the modern workforce systems can handle concurrency, meaning my person handling chat can handle 2 or 3 chats at a time, and so I need to take that into consideration in the way I plan out my work. So so that would be another sort of piece to keep in mind. I think there's sort of an extension of that, which is in order to properly understand work that's going across increasingly multiple channels, it's important to be able to pull together related events. So for those of you that are using a CRM system or some other sort of ticketing or main system, where possible, you want to understand all of the communication activity that happens around resolving one particular customer's issue, right? One particular issue. We've talked for years about first contact resolution and handle time in terms of individual calls. I think what I'm starting to see now, the most sort of forward-thinking and effective planners do is really around understanding how many touch points there are, what that chain reaction will be. So for every one call, I'm going to have this many additional events. Being able to sort of see those together is the first piece in being able to predict and understand what will happen with that volume. So either newer systems do this, but if you don't have that, certainly being able to leverage your CRM or work again with internal resources to, as much as possible, understand what that pattern will be and what sort of the complete handle time will be. It also can change our perspective on occupancy or more broadly on utilization. I said before that one of the main secrets of workforce planning, I guess nowadays, that I discuss with people a lot, especially since COVID, is how can we get smarter, better via leveraging our internal partners, because we don't have the ability to sort of walk the floor, understand what's happening, even just pick that up sort of organically because we're in the same location. And in some cases you haven't been for years, but in many cases you are. I think that goes from sort of the standard things like leverage supervisors to take ownership of adherence, make sure that they're following up, back to James's RACI model, right? So understand sort of who's responsible, who's taking ownership. That's going to help you, especially if you're in a position like Faye in real time, right? That's going to help you to be able to manage what's happening and not have to chase down a bunch of people who are now working from home, and it's easier for them to get caught up in something else that's happening in the house and slip out of, sort of when they're supposed to be back on track. I would say if you are lucky enough to have speech analytics or interaction analytics, one of the best tips that I have gotten, and it was from a conversation with someone where we were trying to solve the problem of of reporting on, okay, we had, a big delta between what was forecasted and what was actual because there was a spike in volume for whatever reason. And the question right then is always why, what happened? And so she was trying to figure out for operational meetings a better way to report back, because they had been using sort of agent dispositions or things they had organically heard. She was finding that more difficult now that you know, there was no water cooler conversation, and she was finding that sort of, you know, IVR tracking or agent dispositioning was not necessarily answering the question. She was giving the same answer all the time. We realized that in another part of her department, they were using speech analytics, and she could get sort of themes from that real time to understand exactly what was happening in changed volumes. And so I think there are some really cool things there that you can leverage, even just if your quality assurance people are, you know, sort of tracking, or your supervisors or other operation planners, just getting another take on what's happening with volume is always helpful. Definitely working jointly on identified hotspots of unplanned leave. You know, not everyone in your organization may have visibility to that, but being able to leverage sort of frontline management to understand what's happening and be able to report back quickly can allow you to predict other or, you know, spread or other things that may be happening like that. I think they talked about at the beginning that payday, which is a new one to me, payday absences. So I think where available, if you can inform your partners in quality assurance about what's happening. And again, sort of modern systems will do this for you, but there are other ways to do it if you don't have that. So being able to sort of tag on those recorded interactions or those events, what the queue time, what was happening in the statistics, I think is a really interesting concept. And being able to vice versa take information from quality on how different employees are performing on different skills or different cues as we go into this more omni-channel world may actually impact your, you know, prioritization. And so again, a better fit means a better experience for our employee, means a better experience for our customer ultimately, and that's really what it's about. And then I would say just here in terms of a final sort of secret or tip, this is an oldie but goodie, and it continues to rear up in my recent conversations. So thought I would bring it out again. It goes really directly to James' Racy model, and I love that. It is, what is the policy around exceptions? Who owns them? Who enters them? What kind are acceptable? You know, what are the boundaries that are in place? If we're not careful in some situations, the rest of our sort of real-time intraday and adherence metrics start to become watered down or less meaningful because of sometimes overuse or free use of exceptions. And so it's just important to understand what you're looking at when you look at any set of data, and having real clear policies around this is, I find, always helpful, John.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for that. If you'd like to see a demonstration of the Playbox solution set, if you'd just like to put that into the box there. Kristen, some great points you made there. Concurrency certainly becomes a big factor in chat. That's a discussion going on in the chat room currently about how to measure occupancy with concurrency, which is quite an interesting one. I think it's quite interesting, your approach of, you know, don't just measure first contact resolution, but actually add together all of the handle time across all of the contacts. I think that's I'd certainly not seen that before, and I think that just makes absolutely perfect sense. And have a clear schedule exception policy, I think, is certainly is great. So we're going to jump across and look at some of the tips that are coming across in the chat room. Let's just get that up on the screen here, and some of the questions that come in from the audience. I think Paul has said, I think this is a question about workforce management. In my experience, 10 to 20% increase after putting in workforce management. You get a scheduling efficiency improvement, will depend on the starting point, but again, 10 to 20% would be not untypical. So let's have a question in from Rhoda, who said, how do you give people the flexibility of choosing shifts that suit them and maintain the quality of leadership, personal development, and one-to-ones and training? We currently have a manager assigned to each team that work on a rotational shift pattern, but would love to be more flexible. Faye, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was thinking intently when you were reading it. I think in terms of maintaining leadership, personal development, one-to-ones, I mean, it might be quite old school, but we maintain a minimum contract, minimum hours a week. 16 is what we run to at the moment. I think really anything less than that, you could go 2 weeks without speaking to your manager. So we run with that. In terms of being more flexible, we've tried something more recently where we needed some additional hours over the COVID period, and people that are contracted to a part-time contract, say 20 hours a week, we said that they could work up to 37, but they can pick when they work those 17 hours, and they can pick them on a weekly basis, and then they don't go into the schedule. They turn up when they want within our operating hours to do these 17 hours a week, and they kind of let us know on the day that I'm here and I'm doing these hours. So I think that works quite well, because you have you have a balance where your 20 hours that you're contracted, I'm picking when you're working. The other bit that you're doing us a favour on, you can pick when you're working. That's definitely a new thing. I've not done that before, but we're trying that with our home moves department at the moment.
A great idea there. So here's a question, Kristen, I guess you might have a view on this. Going digital, what are your feelings on blended media scheduling? Do we want agents switching media types dynamically, or should we schedule blocks of time against a particular media type? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that. Perhaps we'll go to James after.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it depends to some degree on on your hiring profile. And I would say, it's important to go slow. So introduce one at a time, understand sort of skills. Again, this is where having other partners internally really helpful for them to be sharing information so that you can understand how comfortable is our population. Do we have some people who are really comfortable at switching back and forth? Do we have others for whom it would be better to have them stick to one block? I mean, obviously from an optimization standpoint, having the most, we always want as much flexibility as possible. But from a human standpoint, it can certainly be a huge challenge to have blending. I mean, it can be a challenge just to have blended, inbound, outbound at the same time, let alone some of the models that I see today that are just, every single minute is something completely different. I do think that's very difficult. I think the population of not just agents, of any of us that can handle that really effectively is small. I do think that younger generations that are more digital are more used to sort of channel shifting, and they may be more adaptable to that. Yeah, interested in hearing what James has to say.
Yes, I think there's 2 points. Yeah, so I think there's just, rather than feelings, there's actual evidence. So we might find actually an agent doing an email and a phone and an email, their actual performance on whether you scattergraph it unfortunately drops, and that's not because they're not working hard, it's just harder to get in some of these processes if you're jumping around. But I think that the really kind of important thing is the customer. The whole part of blending is we're helping the customer out. So the exciting thing about blending is when I take on an event, and we've got some great systems now, we can drag all those events to one agent and say, fix the problem. That's the goal, rather than saying, should an agent switch? So I think really helping, we don't queue emails, we don't queue chat, we queue customers. And the exciting thing is, can we empower an agent to help that customer? And as a planner, the exciting thing is when they say, yes, I can, it means it deletes all these little items and all the separate queues. So I would say, test it out, what's the evidence, but be really ambitious and queue that customer.
Wonderful. We've got time for one more question, and that is, I'm a self-taught WFM. In fact, who isn't really? I know Faye's actually been on a professional course on this one, which is great. What resources or courses would you recommend to become a specialist in the field? One of the audiences sent in, buy and read Brad Cleveland's book, Contact Center Management on the Fast Forward. Great reference guide, or Chris calls it the Bible for both WFM and CX management. I've actually met Brad out in a conference in the States. Great guy. In fact, if Brad's watching today, hi Brad. Just a sort of a quick round robin. James, any specialist resources for WFM?
Well, if you're starting out now, I would probably try and aim for the future. So I would probably look into the AI side of it. So now I would contact a lot of the kind of software companies, and it definitely in the forecasting, there's a lot of new stuff coming out, and I'm sure they'll love to share what they're doing with you. And if you can get into the AI side of forecasting, you've got many, many years of happy analytical future ahead of you.
Wonderful. Faye, have you got any thoughts on resources or to become a special, or courses to be a specialist?
Yeah, I have. I think courses are important, and I think you alluded to. So I did a course through the forum years ago now, actually. But most of what I've learned is on the job, and it's through talking to other people. So call centre helper, planning forum, LinkedIn. I'm always really if I've got a problem and we can't sort it out, I'll post it out on LinkedIn, get responses in from my network, and I think that really helps me. So just talking about it, Googling, using all the online resources available to you. But I honestly think most of it is learned on the job.
Wonderful. And Kristen, any advice from you on
Yeah, I agree with all of the above. I think there also are some training courses online, and definitely agree with Faye's point in terms of leverage the network, LinkedIn, user groups. If you do start using a tool, there's a lot of resources, certainly call center helper.
Oh, wonderful. So nice to hear that. So unfortunately, we've reached the top of the hour. So just in one or two words, what did you like best about today's webinar? If you'd like to put that into the box, let's have a look at who's got the winning tip. The winning tip sent in by Danny15, who says, instead of sending a list of schedules we need agents to swap, we send a survey asking the agents what schedule they want. And then we select those that help us to balance out the staffing level. So I think that's a great way of sort of flipping the whole planning process round, saying this is what we need into what you want. We've got a short little survey. It's only 3 questions long. If you'd like to fill that in as we leave the webinar, I think it might actually be 4 questions long, but it's not very long at all. If you want to watch the recording, probably in about half an hour's time, we'll have that online. As you know, there's a lot of detail in there, and a lot of what we've talked about, I'm sure you'll want to share with your planning teams or with your management team. We're back next week looking at quality monitoring techniques. I'd just like to thank our 3 speakers for joining us for such a great webinar. James Barnes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Faye Herring, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. And
Kristen Emeneke, thanks for joining us as well.
Thank you.
Well, we're back next week and look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks then. Bye-bye.